I'll begin with this before we actually name names. Penn State is actually really good at retaining guys and keeping them in the program, whether that's they're really good. James Franklin is really good at re-recruiting his own players. That's something I didn't really get to bring up in the second segment, Pat, is the fact that most programs, you see them, all the like groups, large groups of players will, regardless of a coaching change, will just jump right into the portal and it's almost out of control. Penn State, I feel like, is really good at two things: convincing players not to go into A, the portal, but B, leave for the NFL draft. They're good at keeping guys that have those opportunities and say, no, you can have a better opportunity for the time being here with one or two more seasons at Penn State. I guess I'll start it off with names that come to mind. And I like Jerry Cross. I liked his potential. The former 4-star, but I I just don't think he's going to work his way up the depth chart anytime soon. If Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren both go to the NFL, maybe it's a different story. But you have a 5-star in Luke Reynolds coming into the fold in the class of 2024. What are the chances that he redshirts, especially since he's going to be an early enrollee? I don't think he's going to be off of the football field for very long in his true freshman season. Andrew Rapplier seemed to have jumped. We don't have the official depth chart, but based on what we saw at practice once a week, it looked like Rapplier had more opportunities than Jerry Cross. And when the time called for Jerry Cross to go in the game, Mike Yurcich and James Franklin elected not to play him and go with different formations, different packages when they could have run. So like the T formation requires a third tight end. They said, we're not going to run that instead of trying to put Jerry Cross in the game. And Andrew Rapplier, why didn't he go in? Because he was unavailable. So I envision a depth chart of Tyler Warren, Khalil Dinkins, Andrew Rapplier, and Luke Reynolds. I just don't see a spot for Jerry Cross anymore, especially now that the years kind of go on.
Yeah, I think when you look at guys that could potentially enter, now Cross is what, 2022 recruit, so he's a redshirt, will be a redshirt sophomore. So, it's still a little bit young in his development, and he's such a big kid that, could he have a future on the offensive line? I know when I watched his highlights back when he was a recruit, I liked him defensively quite a bit, which I also liked Khalil Dinkins defensively quite a bit. So who knows how good I am at scouting, although I still think that Khalil Dinkins would be a great linebacker or D-end. But anyway, yeah, I feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, just throwing out names. But what I would say is that, right, look at guys who have been around, that are coming up on their fourth year or fifth, certainly their fifth year with the program, but even their fourth year with the program. And if they haven't really, cracked, the two deep at this point, and especially, I would say offensively even more so than defensively, just because Penn State has done such a good job of, rotating. You look at defensive tackle this year, and the snap shares were so close between Durant and Izzard when he was healthy, and Beeman and Devon Ellies. I think that, right, if you would have told me 4 years ago Devon Ellies would still be at Penn State, I don't know if I would have fully believed you, just because he's been a guy that has, he started, but yet never was the guy in the same way that maybe he could have if he went somewhere else, or at least could have been talked into if he went somewhere else. I guess to name a name that I would kind of look at, Devon Townley. He went to the transfer portal last year, made the switch to D tackle and didn't really do too much. Now Penn State did have pretty good depth at D tackle, but a player like him who has been around for a little bit longer at this point will probably have his degree or be very close to his degree. So I would simply just look at guys like that. I think wide receiver. Can I say Liam Clifford? Liam Clifford might love Penn State so much, and I think that he's the type of guy that maybe Penn State's happy to keep around, like the same way Devon Ellies was, or Aeneas Hawkins, who stayed around for his entire career. But if you're Liam Clifford, can you go to a Boston College or a Syracuse or
Cincinnati?
Yeah, Cincinnati, and maybe does he want to play more? So it's tough to get in the minds of these players because some of these guys, maybe it is just simply their dream to play at Penn State and they want to stay as long as they can. And you point to a guy like Bryce Effner back in the day, who once again probably could have been a guy that left and went somewhere else. He stuck around and was able to carve out starter level snaps, and certainly once Alu went down last year was a full-time starter. So, it's tough to say without getting into the minds of these guys, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would just simply look at, wide receiver. I think is going to be a place where even a couple younger guys will pop out just because of, James Franklin was screaming from the mountaintops this year about we need wide receivers to step up. They're not consistent enough.
Yeah.
And, nobody really did. So I think that could be a room you see a lot of movement in. And then, I think that it's safe to mention that, guys like Katron Allen and guys like Abdul Carter, not that let me be clear, I fully expect them back at Penn State, but you just never know if Georgia, talks to Mr. and Mrs. Katron Allen and says, hey, enter the portal. There might be an offer for your son. I'm just simply saying you can never say never when it comes to that. I think Penn State is in a decent enough spot when it comes to NIL that they should be able to be okay with that. But there's obviously so much things going on in the background that I would just simply be aware of it. Penn State should be fine though, but I just simply wanted to mention that just as a never say never.
Well, let me take the subject of the wide receiver room, because this is what I'm hearing, Pat, is that it's getting blown up, open competition. No one's job is safe. Now, there's a preference, obviously, to keep a Keandre Lambert-Smith and a Dante Cephas, who probably really isn't in a position to enter the draft or transfer again, because he wouldn't have that eligibility anymore. He doesn't have that second transfer, so he's kind of already used that opportunity. But everybody else, Marcus Hagans is now the head coach of the wide receivers. James Franklin has made that apparent. So Marcus Hagans has a lot of control, has a lot of say of what goes on. And if he wants to rework this whole part of the team in his image, well, he's going to go get players that fit what he wants to do. So I think of guys like Tyler Johnson, even Christian Driver, right? Anthony Ivy as well. The guys that we didn't see on the football field, period. Maybe there were some injuries involved, but we always heard some good things about Amari Evans. We always heard good things about, okay, Dante Cephas is getting better. And that was supposed to be a 2-year project. That wasn't supposed to be a one and done, and his second year will certainly be better. But when you can go get guys like McCulley out of the transfer portal, potentially a Tyree, who are you going to give the scholarship to, Pat, when you already know what you have in the likes of a Tyler Johnson and an Anthony Ivy, and you know that you might have better, and it's simply speculation, but you got to think Penn State's going from the grass is greener on the other side of this approach.
I think that if you look at the wide receiver room right now, who are you fully confident is back at Penn State next year? Like 100%, no doubt, like definitely will be back at Penn State. I don't know if there's one or two or three names.
Trey Wallace, Keandre Lambert-Smith, because he's didn't play his way into an NFL.
Sure, Keandre, I can't say I'm 100% sure Keandre Lambert-Smith is back.
Okay.
And that's just kind of what I mean, where it's like,
yeah,
he had such a weird season, and I don't know. I think in his mind, he certainly wanted to go to the NFL, the same way that there's been other players in the past that in their mind, they're going to the NFL and they're going to go there no matter what. I think of like a Ryan Bates back in the day who, enters the NFL draft, ends up going undrafted. If he would have came back, could have potentially, ended up going higher. Now, granted, he's had quite the NFL career, but I don't know. I can't say that with certainty right now that Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think, is 100% is back. Dante Cephas probably, because like you said, because he already did grad transfer to Penn State, which was the reason why that he, couldn't enroll until after spring practice because he wanted to get his degree, that he can't do that again. Maybe him. I think you're right with Trey Wallace. He's more than likely.
He's probably the biggest guarantee, and Cephas is only because he can't.
Yeah,
he can't go anywhere.
But everybody else, right? Liam Clifford, Caden Saunders, Christian Driver, Anthony Ivy, Malik McLean. I mean, probably Malik McLean just because he did just transfer here. But the point being is that wide receiver room has been, from what we saw this year, there just wasn't anyone that fully stepped up, and everyone's kind of in that limbo.
Amari Evans is another safe one. I would say Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, and Keandre Lambert-Smith are the three that are protected, if you will, because you're not going to cast it. Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think, can be a really good 2 or a 3. He's not a 1. And let's stop pretending he is. I'm glad that he can make the plays against Indiana and West Virginia, but you need difference makers against Ohio State and Michigan. That's
Yeah.
just the reality of it.
The only thing I'll say about Amari Evans, and I don't want to say specifically like Amari Evans, but just his prototype of guy that's not originally, I mean, he's originally actually from Ohio. He ended up moving to Texas while he's in high school, but right,
Sure.
somebody who's like not fully from PA, right? Has kind of been all over the place. I think all of us had much higher expectations for him coming into the year. I remember, going into spring practice and around then, I think he would have been one of the safer bets for, to be someone that was going to have double-digit receptions, and he only had 4 receptions. And thankfully, one of those did come in that Michigan State game, which is, we will hold near and dear to us for the entire offseason. That's all we need it. But he just kind of fits the archetype of, right, if I'm just looking at a blank, not knowing his name, not originally from, this area per se, and has ties to Texas, and maybe had an underwhelming year in his mind, maybe thought he wasn't utilized the right way. I think James Franklin, made it very clear that he thought that Mike Yurcich, and maybe he was talking about, maybe Amari Evans was one of the guys, but James was not happy with focusing on the things that players could do rather than thinking about the things that they can't do. And I think there's a reason why when you look at Evans' snaps throughout the season, they really went for an uptick in the games that Mike Yurcich was no longer the offense coordinator. So maybe there's some frustration there, which then sure, Penn State, bring in a new offense coordinator. All of this, once again, is to say that when you have a wide receiver room that you don't know if you're the number 9 wide receiver or you don't know if you're the number 3 wide receiver, you don't really know what is going to happen. And then when you start bringing in guys, which Penn State certainly will at wide receiver, that can also change things where, maybe just throwing out there, maybe a Trey Wallace thinks that he is the number 2 wide receiver, and all of a sudden Penn State's bringing in 3 wide receivers. Does he think differently? So once again, I it's tough to know without getting in the minds of these guys, and everybody thinks differently. And Marquise Haggins could be very, very open with them. They could be completely understanding of the situation that Penn State's in. I just personally, in the way that, you look at Drew, or you look at Jalen Reed, or you look at, Kevin Winston, where it's 100% in, probably not going to leave. Jalen Reed maybe for the NFL, but I think he comes back for another year as well. But certainly don't think portaling. So it's just it's just funny thinking back to last offseason when the wide receiver room was what it was, where it's, man, Penn State really needs some help there. And all in all, they did a pretty good job, right? Bringing in an all-MAC wide receiver and Dante Cephas, bringing in, a really talented kid in Malik McLean. And somehow we're here a year later and maybe in a worse-ish position. I mean, it's tough to say, but we'll also see what happens with the portal.